My son's wife dumped a box of my belongings on the front porch in the middle of Christmas dinner and said, "We've already called a mover. You have until New Year's to get out." I set down my fork, wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin, reached into my cardigan pocket, and placed a single envelope on the table. "Before anyone touches that box," I said, "you should probably read what's inside that." She laughed. She had no idea I'd been preparing that envelope for 4 months. Before we continue, please subscribe to Iron Vengeance and let us know in the comments where you're listening from today. The house on Claremont Drive had been mine for 31 years. Eleanor and I bought it the summer our son, Daniel, started 2nd grade. She'd fallen in love with the bay window in the kitchen, the way afternoon light came through it in long gold strips that reached halfway across the linoleum floor. We painted that kitchen 4 times over 3 decades, always ending up back at the same shade of pale yellow she'd chosen first. Some things are right from the beginning. Eleanor passed away from a stroke 18 months before Christmas of this story. "Quick," the doctors said. As if that were comfort. I'd worked as a certified public accountant for 38 years, the last 22 running my own small firm downtown. Numbers had always made sense to me in ways that people sometimes didn't. After Eleanor died, I retired fully, sold the practice to a younger colleague for a fair price, and settled into the kind of quiet that takes time to stop feeling like punishment. Daniel was 41. He'd married his wife, Nicole, 7 years prior, in a ceremony Eleanor and I had paid for in full, $44,000, without being asked a second time. Nicole was pleasant enough in the early years, the kind of pleasant that requires effort and therefore runs out. Her mother, Constance, lived 40 minutes away in Glendale and had, at some point, I couldn't precisely identify, decided that proximity to her daughter's marriage entitled her to opinions about everything connected to it. After Eleanor died, Daniel suggested I come live with them. His house was large, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a neighborhood that still had sidewalks. I appreciated the gesture and told him I preferred my own space. He called twice more over the following 6 months, each time with a slightly different framing. The third time, he said Nicole had offered to set up the guest suite, that it would give them peace of mind knowing I wasn't alone. I heard something underneath that, something I filed away without naming yet. I moved in on a Tuesday in March, brought what I needed, left the rest at Claremont Drive, which I kept. I want to be clear about that. I never sold the house. I rented it to a retired school teacher named Marilyn for $1,800 a month, signed a standard lease, documented everything through my attorney, a sharp woman named Carol Briggs, who'd handled my business contracts for 15 years. Keeping that house was the first decision that would matter later. The first month at Daniel's home was unremarkable. I cooked sometimes, walked in the mornings, watched the news in the evenings. Nicole worked from home 3 days a week and maintained a schedule she kept visible on a whiteboard in the kitchen hallway, color-coded by category. She did not add my schedule to the board. That was fine. I wasn't looking for inclusion on a whiteboard. Constance began appearing by the 2nd month, Tuesdays and Thursdays initially, then most weekdays, then occasionally on weekends. She'd arrive mid-morning, park in the driveway in a way that blocked my car, and stay through dinner. She had opinions about my coffee maker being too loud, about the television volume I kept it at in the guest room, about the fact that I ordered a pizza one Friday night without asking if anyone else wanted some. I ordered an extra large the following Friday and left half in the refrigerator with a note. She did not acknowledge this. In May, I overheard a conversation I was not intended to hear. I was sitting on the back porch with a book. The window to the kitchen breakfast nook was cracked open, and voices carried in the still afternoon air. Nicole's voice and Constance's, close together, the conspiratorial register of a conversation that assumed privacy. Constance said, "The house on Claremont is worth what now? Close to $600,000 in this market." Nicole said, "Daniel says his name is the only one on anything since his mother's estate cleared." "Exactly," Constance said. "So, eventually it all goes where?" "That's the problem," Nicole said. "He's healthy. His doctor said he's like a 64-year-old man who takes care of himself." A pause. "We have to think longer term. Or shorter," Constance said. And then she laughed. I closed my book. I set it on the armrest. I sat there for another 20 minutes without moving, looking at the yard Eleanor had planted with black-eyed Susans along the back fence. Then I went inside, made coffee, and began thinking like an accountant. An accountant doesn't react to a discrepancy. An accountant documents it, traces it back through every record, and builds a picture so complete that no one can argue with the arithmetic. I called Carol Briggs the next morning, told her I needed to talk through some estate planning. She said she had a cancellation Thursday. I said I'd be there. Over the following 4 months, I moved with patience. I'd spent a career developing. I updated my will, restructuring the estate into a revocable trust that named no family members as beneficiaries. The primary beneficiary became the Claremont County Veterans Housing Initiative, an organization I'd done pro bono accounting work for years earlier. The secondary was a children's literacy program Eleanor had volunteered with until the year she died. Carol handled the paperwork with her usual efficiency. Everything notarized, filed, witnessed. I transferred Claremont Drive into the trust. This was the part that required the most precision. The house technically ceased to be mine. In the conventional sense, it belonged to the trust, which I controlled as trustee during my lifetime. At my death, the trust continued under Carol's oversight. The property sold and proceeds directed to the designated charities. No family member had any legal claim. No family member could contest it on the grounds of being an heir because the will explicitly documented the lifetime financial support I'd provided and formally waived further obligation. I reviewed our records. In the 7 years of Daniel and Nicole's marriage, I had contributed the following: the wedding, $44,000, a down payment loan on their current home, $30,000, documented with a promissory note Nicole had signed and never mentioned again, a car purchased for Daniel's 40th birthday, $22,000, miscellaneous transfers over 5 years totaling $16,400. I had bank records, wire confirmations, texts, and in several cases signed acknowledgments for every dollar. Total, $112,400. The promissory note for $30,000 carried a modest interest rate. With 8 years of accumulated interest at the agreed-upon 4%, the outstanding balance was now just over $39,000. I opened a small digital recorder application on my phone. I left it running at relevant moments. I was in my own home, Daniel's home, where I was a documented resident, and California, where we lived, permitted one-party consent recording. Every conversation I participated in was legal to record. By October, I had audio files organized by date and participant, a spreadsheet cross-referencing loans, gifts, and promises, medical documentation from my physician, a comprehensive evaluation showing I was cognitively and physically well within normal range for my age, a note Carol had suggested after she heard what Constance said about Shorter, letters from my accountant, my financial advisor, my physician, a complete record of Marilyn's tenancy at Claremont, receipts and all. I labeled the folder on my laptop simply December. The Christmas invitation came from Nicole in mid-November. Dinner at their home, Christmas Day, just family. She said it with a warmth that had not been present in our day-to-day interactions since around August. When I'd started being a little less available for the dinners, she'd begun arranging with increasing frequency. Each one, including Constance, each one involving a conversation that edged, eventually, toward my plans for the future, my intentions for Claremont, my thoughts on what felt sustainable long-term. I accepted the invitation. I spent the morning of Christmas Day at Claremont Drive. Marilyn was visiting her sister in Phoenix for the holiday, and I had my key. I walked through the rooms, stood at the kitchen bay window, watched the pale December light come through. Not the gold of summer, but something thinner and honest. Eleanor's garden had gone dormant, the black-eyed Susans bare and waiting. Some things survive by going quiet. I arrived at Daniel's house at 2 in the afternoon. The driveway had 3 cars, Daniel's SUV, Nicole's sedan, and Constance's Buick. I had wondered if they'd include others, extended family, buffer guests, who might dilute whatever the afternoon was building toward. They hadn't. Just the 4 of us. Daniel answered the door. He looked tired in the specific way people look when they've been rehearsing something. He took my coat, said something about the traffic, walked me into the living room where a fire was going, and the table through the archway was already set for dinner. Nicole emerged from the kitchen smelling of rosemary and something sweet. She smiled at me with her mouth. Constance came from the hallway, gave me a brief nod of acknowledgement, the kind she'd perfected to communicate presence without warmth. The first hour was procedural. Wine poured. Appetizers set out, conversation distributed in short, safe segments. Constance asked about my health in the specific way that implies she's hoping for useful information. I told her my doctor had cleared me for another year, that my blood pressure was textbook. She said, "Good, good," and looked at Nicole. We sat for dinner at 4. Turkey, roasted vegetables, a sweet potato dish Nicole had gotten from a cooking website. The table was set carefully, the good china, cloth napkins. I noticed they had placed me at the end closest to the kitchen, the seat with no armrests, the chair with a slightly shorter back. A small thing. The kind of small thing accountants notice. Constance opened it. She waited until we'd been eating for perhaps 10 minutes, until the rhythm of the meal had softened everyone's alertness. And then she set down her fork and folded her hands and said, as if continuing a thought already in progress, "We've been talking, the three of us, about what makes sense going forward." I took a bite of turkey, said nothing. Nicole picked up from there, smooth handoff, clearly practiced. "We love having you here, and we want you to know that's not changing. But we've been thinking about the house on Claremont. With the market the way it is, holding on to it doesn't really make sense, and the money could be used so much more practically." "Practically for whom?" I said. Not a question. Daniel, who had been studying his plate, looked up. "Dad, we're talking about your retirement, making sure you're taken care of properly. What if something happened? What if you needed a facility someday? Memory care, whatever it might be, that property could fund that." "I have long-term care insurance," I said. "Have had it for 11 years. It's documented." Nicole's expression shifted slightly. Constance's did not. "That's all well and good," Constance said. "But plans change. You might want to be closer to family. That house sitting there empty." She glanced at me to see whether I'd correct her. I didn't. "It's a significant asset that could be working for everyone." I took another bite. "Everyone," I said. "Your family," Daniel said. "Us. Who else would I mean?" "You have a mortgage on this house," I said. 30 years at a rate I helped you shop for. You have 2 car payments, 1 credit card in collections as of 3 months ago. I know because you asked me to co-sign, and I declined, and you have a promissory note from 7 years ago for $30,000, plus interest that has never been serviced. Not once. Silence. Nicole set down her fork. "That was a gift. You said—" I said the note would reflect generous terms. "I did not say gift. The document Nicole signed says loan. I have the original." I reached for my water glass. "I also have the wire transfer confirmation, the email chain from the week before, where Daniel described it as a loan he'd repay within 5 years, and Nicole's text to her friend the following week saying, and I'll paraphrase, that her father-in-law was loaded, and she doubted he'd ever actually collect." The color left Nicole's face in a visible sequence, from her forehead down. Constance said, "Now, let's not make this adversarial. We're family." "I'm not the one who made it anything," I said. "I'm the one eating turkey." Daniel leaned forward, and I saw the decision cross his face, the choice to abandon the gentle approach and try something more direct. "Dad, we're going to need you to sign the house over. We've already talked to a real estate attorney. Given your age and the estate situation, it actually makes more sense to transfer it now, before I die," I said. "You can say it before any complications arise," he said. "It keeps things clean, avoids probate." "I have a trust," I said. "There is no probate concern. Carol Briggs filed the paperwork in September." Another silence. Longer this time. Nicole stood. She walked around the table, past the kitchen doorway, and down the short hall where the garage access was. I heard a door open, the scrape of something on concrete. She came back carrying a cardboard box, medium-sized, the kind that copy paper comes in. She set it on the floor next to my chair. Inside, I could see my reading glasses case, a framed photo of Eleanor and me from our 25th anniversary, a stack of my mail, a spare phone charger, the wool blanket I kept on the foot of my bed. "We've already arranged for a moving company," Nicole said. Her voice had changed entirely, the warmth gone, the performance done. "January 3rd. They'll handle the rest of your things. You have until New Year's to make arrangements." I looked at the box. I looked at the photo of Eleanor visible through the open flap. I looked at my son, who was not meeting my eyes. I set down my fork. I wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin, folded it carefully, placed it beside my plate. Then I reached into my cardigan pocket and removed a standard white business envelope, sealed, with Carol Briggs' firm name printed in the upper left corner. I placed it in the center of the table. "Before anyone touches that box," I said, "you should read what's inside that." "What is it?" Daniel said. "Everything," I said. "Read it." Nicole picked it up first. She slid it open with her thumbnail. Inside was a single folded sheet, a letter from Carol's office summarizing, in plain language, the following: "The current status of my estate, held in trust, the named beneficiaries, the outstanding promissory note and current balance," and a reference to a separate sealed packet held at Carol's office, available upon request, containing 96 days of financial documentation, recorded conversations, and a formal letter to the Claremont County District Attorney's Office regarding elder financial abuse. A letter that Carol had been instructed to send in the event that I did not check in with her office by December. "Heimu South." Nicole read it. Then she handed it to Daniel without a word. Constance leaned over to read it with him. I watched all three of their faces. Daniel said, "This is Dad. This is extreme. This is completely—" "Read the second paragraph again," I said. "Specifically the part about the promissory note." He read. He read it again. $39,412, I said. "That's the current balance with 8 years of interest at the rate you agreed to. It's the most generous interest rate I've ever offered anyone, 4% simple, because I assumed good faith on both sides. I have the note. I have your signature and Nicole's signature. I have the wire confirmation. Civil recovery in California for a documented promissory note is straightforward. Wage garnishment is available as a remedy." Nicole said, "You wouldn't." "I already filed the intent to collect," I said. "December 22nd. Carol's office sent the notice to this address. I assume you haven't checked your mail today." Daniel's voice dropped. "You filed on Christmas Eve." "December 22nd is 2 days before Christmas Eve," I said. "I filed then because the courts needed to receive it before the holiday closure. Timing is important in legal matters. You learn that after a while." Constance set down the letter. Her voice was venomous in the precise way it had been in August when she thought I couldn't hear her through the kitchen window. "You are a bitter, vindictive old man, using money to punish your own son because you're lonely, and this is the only power you have left." I turned to look at her directly, possibly for the first time since March. "Constance," I said, "on October the 9th, you told Nicole that the simplest solution was to get a doctor to say I was showing signs of early cognitive decline, that with the right framing, it wouldn't take much to establish a conservatorship. You said, and I'll quote you precisely because I have the audio, that I was starting to slip, and that a concerned family filing for protection was completely sympathetic to any judge." I paused. "I have never forgotten your name. I have never been confused in any documented interaction with any professional. My physician's evaluation, conducted November 14th, rated my cognitive function in the 91st percentile for my age cohort. The evaluation is part of the packet at Carol's office." Constance's mouth opened. "Closed." "Conspiring to pursue a fraudulent conservatorship," I said, "is a crime in California. It falls under elder abuse statutes. I haven't decided whether to include that in the DA letter. I'm leaving that decision to Carol's judgment." The fire crackled in the living room. Somewhere outside, a car with holiday music drove past and faded. Daniel stood, pushed his chair back. His voice had the shaky quality of a man who had prepared for a negotiation and found himself instead in a courtroom. "Dad, whatever you think you heard, whatever Carol's told you, we can talk about this. We can fix it. This doesn't have to be." "Sit down, Daniel." He sat. I took a breath. I had not raised my voice once, and I intended to keep it that way. "I moved into your home in March because you asked me to, and because I thought it was a genuine offer. I brought nothing with me that wasn't invited. I paid for my own groceries every week. I didn't ask for anything that wasn't offered. In return, within 6 weeks, you and Nicole began a systematic campaign to convert my cooperation into consent. Consent to sell Claremont, consent to sign assets over, consent to accept a future you designed for your own benefit. I looked at my son. "You know that's true. I'm giving you the opportunity to say so." He said nothing, which was its own answer. "The house on Claremont Drive," I said, "is held in the Hargrove Family Trust, established September 17th. I am the trustee. The trust owns the property. I cannot sell it, sign it over, or transfer it without violating my own trust document, which I have no legal obligation to do and every legal reason not to. At my death, the trust continues under Carol's administration, and the property is liquidated for charitable disbursement. No family member is named in any document. The trust has already been registered with the county. That process completed November 2nd. Nicole said, very quietly, "You gave everything to charity." "I designated everything to organizations that do meaningful work with people who earned what they receive," I said. "Yes." Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. "The loan. We can't, Nicole. We can't pay $39,000. "There is a repayment plan included in the collection notice," I said. $650 monthly for 60 months at the current rate. That retires the debt, including accrued interest, by January of 2030. If you default on 2 consecutive payments, the civil filing proceeds, and Carol pursues judgment. Wages, bank accounts, and any applicable assets are subject to collection at that point." Nicole walked to the kitchen counter and stood with her back to the room. Her shoulders were very still. Constance said, "So what happens now? You've won. You want us to applaud?" "I want you to understand that what you planned was not a private family disagreement," I said. "You planned to take a man's property, remove his financial independence, and, if necessary, fabricate a medical case to take his legal autonomy. That's not a family dispute. Those are crimes. I documented them because I spent 38 years documenting things for a living, and because Eleanor taught me that preparation is the only real form of hope." I said her name without meaning to. It just came out, the way it still sometimes did. I stood. I picked up the box of my belongings from the floor beside my chair, tucked it under one arm. "I'll collect the rest of my things Thursday," I said. "That gives you time to adjust. The moving company you arranged can be canceled or redirected as you see fit. I won't be needing it." I looked at Daniel. "The first payment on the note is due January 15th. Carol will confirm receipt. If you want to discuss the terms further, you can contact her office. Her number is on the letterhead." I walked to the door. I found my coat on the rack where Daniel had hung it, put it on with one hand, the box balanced in the other. Behind me, the kitchen was absolutely silent. No silverware, no fire pop, no voices. At the door, I stopped. "The children's literacy program that Eleanor volunteered with is named in the trust," I said without turning around. "She used to talk about it over dinner sometimes. I don't know if you ever listened." I opened the door. "Merry Christmas." The drive back to Claremont Drive took 22 minutes. Marilyn's side of the house was dark. A note tucked in the mailbox, wishing me happy holidays and mentioning she'd be home the 27th. I let myself in through the front door, set the box on the kitchen table, put the kettle on. I stood at the bay window while the water heated. The street was quiet, decorated houses, a few families visible through lit windows. The pale light that had been thin and honest that morning was now gone entirely. Just the dark and the cold and the amber of street lamps on bare branches. I texted Carol. All documents remained in my possession throughout. No signatures requested. Confirm standby. Her reply came in 4 minutes. Confirmed. Standing by through 26th. Glad you're home safe. Merry Christmas. I made tea, and sat at the kitchen table where Eleanor and I had sat every Sunday morning for 27 years reading the paper. The box was in front of me. I lifted out the framed photo from our 25th anniversary. Sequoia National Park. Eleanor in a red jacket, laughing at something I'd said right before the shutter clicked, something I could no longer remember. Her laugh I remembered without effort. I set the photo against the sugar bowl where I could see it. The next 48 hours were the quiet kind. I slept well, which surprised me only briefly. Guilt produces sleeplessness. Clarity does not. Thursday, I returned to Daniel's house. Daniel was at work. Nicole answered the door, looked at me for a long moment, then stepped aside. She didn't speak while I gathered my things from the guest suite, folded the linens, left the room as I'd found it in March. My boxes were stacked by the front door when I came down the second time. She'd packed the rest. At the door, she said, "We'll make the payment. January 15th. Carol will confirm it," I said. She looked at me with something I recognized after a moment as the specific exhaustion of a person who has run out of moves. "Did you always know? Since March?" "I suspected in May," I said. "I started documenting in June. By September, I was certain." "6 months," she said. "I'm an accountant," I said. I closed the books carefully. I loaded my car in 2 trips. The drive back was 15 minutes. I unloaded in 1. That evening, my phone showed 2 voicemails. The first was from Daniel's aunt in Sacramento, my late wife's sister, Margaret. She said Daniel had called her, that he'd described me as having some kind of breakdown, that I was cutting off my family over money, that she was worried and wanted to talk. The second was from Daniel's college roommate, a man I'd met perhaps 4 times, saying he'd heard things were difficult and he hoped I'd reconsider. I called Margaret first. "I'm going to send you something," I told her. "Audio files, some documents. Read them, and then tell me who's having the breakdown." She called back 40 minutes later. Her voice was different. She said, "Jesse, I owe you an apology. I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "You called because you were worried," I said. "That's the right instinct. I'm not angry." "What do you need?" she said. "Nothing right now," I said, "but I appreciate you asking." The college roommate I did not return. By January, the Claremont house had a new quality I was still learning to name. Not emptiness, more like the way a room feels after furniture has been rearranged, the same space revealing itself differently. I walked the morning route I'd always walked. I cooked the things Eleanor had taught me to cook. I kept the bay window clean so the light came through without interruption. On January 15th, a deposit appeared in Carol's trust account. $650. Nicole's name on the transfer. Carol sent me a text. Payment 1 received. Remaining balance, $38,762. I replied, "Acknowledged. Thank you, Carol." Then I put my phone in my pocket and went to get my coat. Margaret was coming for coffee. She was driving in from Sacramento, 3 hours, because she said she wanted to see the house Eleanor had loved so much, the kitchen especially, the bay window she'd heard about for 30 years. I put the good coffee on. I found the photograph from our 25th anniversary and set it on the kitchen table where the light would hit it right. Some things deserve to be seen clearly. In February, I received a formal letter from the Veterans Housing Initiative acknowledging the trust designation. The director, a former Army sergeant named Thomas Okafor, called to thank me personally. He walked me through the specific programs the eventual bequest would support: transitional housing, job training, mental health access for veterans, carrying things civilians were never meant to fully understand. "Will you want your name on anything?" he asked. "A fund? A room? Something like that?" "No," I said. "The Eleanor Hargrove Literacy Reading Room, if the literacy program is willing. That name I'd like to see used." He said he'd pass it along. He did. The literacy program director called me 2 weeks later and cried a little, apologized for crying, and told me Eleanor's name would be on the reading room when their new branch opened in the fall. I wrote that date in my calendar. March arrived the way it does in California, tentatively warm, the kind of warmth that's still deciding. I planted black-eyed Susans along the back fence line. They wouldn't bloom until summer, but they were in the ground, which was the first requirement. Daniel called once, in late February. I let it go to voicemail. He said he wanted to talk, that there was a lot that had gone wrong, that he thought with time things could be different. He sounded genuinely tired, not performed tired. The real kind. I listened to the message twice. Then I saved it in a folder I labeled Not Yet and did nothing further with it. The payments arrived on the 15th of every month with the precision of someone who understood what missing one would cost them. I did not track them emotionally. Carol tracked them professionally. That was the appropriate division of labor. I had coffee with Margaret on the first Saturday of every month. She brought her husband Howard twice. He was a quiet man who liked the same sports I'd stopped following and had opinions about coffee grinders that I found surprisingly compelling. Good people exist in all the places you think to look and several where you don't. My physician called in April to say my blood work was excellent. My blood pressure was better than last year. I thanked him and scheduled my next appointment. On a Wednesday evening in May, I sat at the kitchen table with the bay window open to let the evening air in and wrote in the journal I'd started in September, back when I was still building the case, when every entry had been factual and procedural. Now the entries were different, shorter, less evidence, more observation. Tonight, watch the black-eyed Susans come in. First blooms along the east section of the fence. Eleanor would have taken a photograph. I wrote that and sat with it for a while. Then I wrote, I am 68 years old. I am in good health. I live alone by choice in the house I chose with the woman I chose to spend my life with. I was taken advantage of by people I trusted. I documented it, addressed it, and drew a clear boundary. That boundary holds. I thought about what Mark had said in the original story, that version of the sentiment that gets used when someone has lost the argument and wants to wound anyway, that line about dying alone, about nobody caring. Nicole hadn't said anything quite that direct. Daniel had been careful, but Constance, in one of the last exchanges before Christmas, had said something similar in her way, that I would spend my last years in a house full of paperwork and a lot of good that would do me. I'd thought about that. I'd considered it honestly, the way you have to consider things that are meant to hurt. And here is what I found when I looked at it plainly. I had one genuine friend in Carol, who handled my legal affairs with intelligence and loyalty. I had Eleanor's sister Margaret, who drove 3 hours to sit in my kitchen and drink good coffee and talk about the person we'd both loved. I had a veterans organization that knew my name and was building something lasting with the plans I'd made. I had a children's literacy program that was going to put Eleanor's name on a door that thousands of children would walk through for decades. I had a house where the light came in right in the mornings. I had the black-eyed Susans finally blooming in May. There are people who would call that lonely. They are welcome to their assessment. I would call it honest. After 68 years, I know the difference between a life that looks full and a life that is. Payment 14 arrived on the 15th. $4,200 total received. $35,000 and change outstanding. The arithmetic was clean. It always is, if you set it up correctly from the start. I made coffee. I sat at the bay window. Morning light, the good kind. If this story meant something to you, please leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from today. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Iron Vengeance so you don't miss what comes next.